everybody. I'm Beatty Cohn-Redos, and welcome again, my friends, to the Ask Beatty show. And I think now more than ever, what the world needs now is love, sweet love. And I'm hoping that you've all had a really, really good week. I can hardly believe that it is almost the end of 2024. And hopefully, the majority of you are on track, and it's been a productive and a constructive and a loving 2024. And for those of you who may be tuning in for the very first time, I can hardly believe that I have been hosting the Ask Beauty show here on the Progressive Radio Network. It's 12 years. I keep thinking it's 13 years, but I'm going into my 13th year, and you can just imagine hosting a weekly show for 13 years. I really need to do all of the calculations, but I hope, and I say this every single week to all of you, that I hope that for all of you who've been tuning in all these years, that this has been helpful. And I hope also that every single week that there may be one little thing, one little maybe small thing that can make a productive and constructive difference really in your life and in your relationship. And of course, you all know I am a psychotherapist, and I'm also a sex therapist. People will say to me all the time, gee, you're a sex therapist. Well, the reality is, and you may be surprised to hear this, is that almost nobody, and this has really been true for all of these years. I mean, I've been practicing now as a psychotherapist and sex therapist for over 35 years, which is also a number that I can hardly believe. But virtually no one ever really calls, for, in quotes, sex therapy. The typical reasons that people call, depression and anxiety and substance abuse of various different kinds, and domestic violence, and of course relationship issues, early child sexual abuse. But yes, I am also a sex therapist. And of course, the reality is, and I continue to follow the various different studies, is that I think that people are also, they're not doing so well generally. I mean, speaking, I mean, we really are in the midst of a mental health crisis, a loneliness epidemic. I mean, even our Surgeon General is really talking about this. And when it comes to sex, even the people that I'm treating in my private practice here in New York City and also in East Hampton, people are not having, and at least it seems to me, as much sex as they used to in previous years. I mean, I will even talk to friends and they'll say, well, it's just not a priority anymore. And I think that sex is a wonderful, wonderful thing to have in a loving relationship. And I met with a couple yesterday, and I was telling them, I said, it's really important to prioritize your relationship, and to also not forget about your sex life and that sexual physical connection. It really does add spice, and it also adds closeness, and not just physical intimacy, but emotional intimacy as well. So here I am, a psychotherapist, a sex therapist. I'm also the advice columnist for Dan's papers in the Hamptons and in Palm Beach, and I've been writing for them now. Going to be going into the third year. I write 2 Beatty columns every single month. And all you really need to do, you don't need to be looking for Dan's papers, especially if you're not in New York City or you're not in the Hamptons or Palm Beach. All you need to do is Google Ask Beatty, Dan's papers, and to date, it's been about 80 columns that I have written about a variety of different subjects, relationships and extramarital affairs and depression and various different psychiatric ailments that so many people are trying to really deal with in their lives. So people will oftentimes ask me, so what is this Ask Beatty show of yours? What is it really all about? And the show is, in one word, it's really about empowerment. I am hoping every single week to be able to deal with issues that really do impact so many people's lives, if not all people's lives at different points in time, and to be able to give you hope, to be able to give you motivation, to be able to inspire you that you will be willing, regardless of what's happened in your early childhood, regardless of what's happened yesterday, to be willing, maybe once and for all, for the first time in your life, to be willing to acknowledge and address and resolve as best as we can. Nothing is ever going to be perfect, the issues and problems that continue to play havoc with our lives and our relationships. And I think that that is a choice that people really need to make. I mean, I hear so many people who just basically given up on life. They've given up on love. They've given up on relationships, which is why every single week I ask you to really check in with yourself. And the segment, how are you doing? I think it's a really important segment. I mean, some people, ask these questions, once a year when they make New Year's resolutions about the things that they think and the things that they want to really be doing differently. But I found that it's very important, and this is why I ask you to do this, and I do this myself, to really check in and ask yourself some really pertinent and central questions that will either make or break our lives and our relationships, beginning with our own emotional well-being, our own mental health. So I'm going to ask you again, how are you doing? And is your depression, perhaps, that you've had, is it getting better, and what are you actually doing? It's one thing to talk about, but what are you actually doing to improve the depression issues that you may have and that you may have suffered with for years and years and years? Or what about the panic attacks or the anxiety? Or what about your unfinished business? And I think that we all have, to a greater or lesser degree, some unfinished business, beginning with our own family of origin. So it's really important to just kind of go through all of this. And it's not about just looking and talking about the issues, but it's about what do we need to do? And this is why I'm constantly asking people what to do so that we're going to be able to find ways to move forward with our lives, so that we don't end up having that the past then becomes our present. And it can really paralyze us in all kinds of ways to be able to enjoy today and to be able to enjoy our lives in the present. So when it comes to mental health, I hope that you're doing well. And I often say, and I probably have been saying this for years and years and years to people, that we do not need to navigate the ups and downs of life on our own. Hopefully you have friends. Hopefully you have family. Hopefully you have some confidants that you're able to talk to when life gets tough. And believe me, life gets tough for all of us at different times in our life. So it's about having a plan of action. If you're finding the depression, regardless of the exercise, regardless of the perhaps medication that you may be on, is not doing the trick, I think it's really, really important to then get a second opinion and see what else is it that may be going on. Maybe there's something physical. Maybe there's actually something physical that is impacting your mood. And of course, if we're looking at relationships, relationships affect everything. They affect our emotional well-being, our physical well-being, or our lack of well-being, which is why if you've been listening to me all these years, you've heard me say that my goal, certainly in life, and my goal for you is to have zero, not a little bit, but zero toxicity when it comes to your relationships. Because the truth is, and I think you can all acknowledge this, is that a little bit of poison is really poison. And research really shows, Dr. Grant was talking about the real danger of being in ambivalent relationships where it's up, it's down, you never quite know what the ride is going to be like. In fact, in my latest article in Dan's papers, I was talking about the importance of getting off the emotional roller coaster ride. I mean, it's an awful thing to be in relationships with people where you never know whether you're going to be getting the carrot or you're going to be getting the stick. And if you find that those typically have been the kinds of relationships that you have found yourself in, I would guess that probably for you, it really began in the beginning, so that there are things that need to get sorted out. And that's what I mean when I talk about the importance of emotionally trying to work through what did and didn't happen when you were a child, because that blueprint, it's a very, very, very strong blueprint. And what I've seen in my practice, I've treated thousands of people of every race, every gender, every socioeconomic, that things really do begin in the beginning. And, for example, people who grew up in abusive homes, unless they have done some work, and some people need to do a lot of work, what you end up seeing is that they then repeat history. It's not their fault. I'm not making any judgments. It's an unconscious thing that can go on if we aren't really clear about what's happened, about what has not happened, and more importantly, what we then need to do. What do we need to do? Do we need to see a therapist? Do we need to start exercising? Do we need to throw away the alcohol and stop rationalizing that, 3 or 4 drinks a night is really no big deal because they may help us go to sleep? So this is where getting second opinions are so important, because when you think about it, we actually, I know I do, I ask for second opinions just about everything. I want to make sure that decisions that I'm making, whether or not, Jim and I recently bought a TV, I asked a lot of questions. I wanted second opinions and I wanted third opinions. And that isn't even an important kind of a thing, just to make sure that we actually do our homework, so that we are going to really be really on track. And our physical health, I mean, we're talking about obesity, we're still talking about the importance of exercise and eating well and sleeping well. And I understand about the drugs that a lot of people who have been overweight for years and have been struggling, to lose weight, are now on a variety of different FDA approved drugs. And, that could be good. It could be a beginning, but a drug is not going to do the trick permanently. Again, we need to ask ourselves, and we need to think about, are we living? And this is the question I ask. I ask myself, and I ask my patients, and I'm asking you, are we really living our lives in ways that are in our best interest? And it's important to pause and make sure every single week, at least when you tune in to the Ask Beatty show, that you are really, really on track, and that you are not fooling yourself, whether or not you're remaining in toxic relationships, whether you are not attending to the depression, the anxiety, the substance abuse, the early child sexual abuse, the domestic violence relationships that you may have experienced as a child, or as an adult. And remember, my friends, it's not like we can change history. We can't change anything that happened even a second ago. But I do believe that it is the responsibility of all of us. It is the responsibility of us as adults to not let our histories and our traumas and our disappointments get in the way of our being able to live well today. And that may mean, that really, really may mean eliminating, and I'm not talking about shooting or violence, but that may be eliminating certain people from your life who make you crazy 50% of the time, and 50% of the time keeps you on a never-ending roller coaster ride, which is not, it is absolutely not something that is in your best interest. So it's about caring for yourself, under the umbrella of self-care, and being mindful and being aware and asking yourself routinely, am I being good to myself? I think a lot of people walk around with feelings of guilt and shame, and in doing so, inadvertently, consciously, not consciously, end up beating themselves up in a variety of ways and don't know why. So if you find that you are in a downward cycle, can't change yesterday, but today you might be able to say to yourself, I've been in this downward cycle for weeks or months or years, but today is the day. I am going to do something differently. Maybe it might mean reaching out to a 12-step program. Maybe it might be trying to have a consultation with a therapist. Maybe you haven't had a complete physical in a while, and you're just not feeling on top of your game medically and physically. So, I'm hoping again that today will be a motivational day for you. It will be an inspirational day for you. Well, you will be on track to doing things and living your life in ways that are really in your best interest. Because if we avoid doing what I call the work, it is our avoidance and denial and the excuses and the defensiveness and the self-blame that we then, it's not somebody else, it's us that's keeping ourselves in a downward spiral. Okay, so that please, I hope that you believe that it is really okay and that it is not a weakness to reach out and ask for some good professional help. And when people are in therapy, I mean, it's true, I've seen people for, some who've had terrible traumatic backgrounds. I've seen them for a number of years, but most of the people that I see, this is not years and years of therapy. They need some understanding of what it is that's getting in the way of their lives and their relationships. And people who work with me, they work, of course, very hard. And I would say, within a few months, some a little longer, some a little shorter, they're really able to transform their lives in ways that they really never dreamed possible. Well, on a very routine basis, you've heard me talk about my book, For Better, for Worse, Forever, Discover the Path to Lasting Love. And I routinely mention that I only wish that I had had this book when I began my own dating and relationship life. And the reality is, I mean, we don't need to go very further than just looking at family and friends and colleagues to see that we are not doing well in the world of relationships. And I just want to read you some very depressing statistics. Now, I don't want to depress you, but there's a reality here that we really have to be willing to acknowledge. Did you know that every single day here in the United States, 3 women are murdered uh, as a result of domestic violence by their, so-called intimate partners? Every year, approximately 132,000 women report that they have been victims of rape or attempted rape. And what is really sad and really depressing is that more than half of them knew their attackers. Every year, approximately 1.2 million women are forcibly raped by their current or former male partner. And if we're looking at the divorce rate, and this is a statistic that I routinely talk about here on the Ask Beatty show, the divorce rate, and let's be clear about this, for first marriages is 48%. And people who are marrying for the second time, we all hope that it's going to be a better marriage. We're going to make better choices than we did the first time. But the divorce rate for second marriages is 67%. So it goes from 48% to 67%. What about the divorce rate for third marriages, for third and fourth marriages? Well, this is a very depressing statistic, but it's true. And again, we need to deal with reality. We have to stop fooling ourselves and pretending that things are okay when they're really, really not okay in the world of relationships. So the divorce rate for third marriages happens to be 71, 72%. So what is it? What is it that is really going on here? I mean, we have never had so many relationship books and relationship podcasts and relationship therapists and love coaches. And it goes on and on and on. And I think that there has never, certainly never been so much talk and focus on mental health and on relationships. And of course, you just have to look at the television shows. And I have some real issues, of course, with a lot of the relationship television shows that air on major networks. I think that they oftentimes make a real mockery of what it means and what it should mean to be really demonstrating to people what healthy relationships really are. So again, we have to ask ourselves before we can get to the solution, because there are solutions, and I have good news. I have really good evidence-based news to share with people about how to never make a mistake in love again. So the question, of course, despite all of the focus on mental health, all of the focus on relationships, why is this happening? And much more importantly, what can we do about it? So what I have learned, and I want to be really honest with you, I did not know all of this or most of this when I began my own relationship and dating life. Well, when I think about it, I mean, it's really quite amazing. And this is before all of my training at McGill. And of course, I have a master's degree in clinical social work, and I have postgraduate specialization in marriage and family therapy and sexual dysfunction from McGill University in Montreal. Of course, I'm Canadian, I have dual citizenship. But the fact is that I, like, most people, really, really was not a student, a wise student, when it came to understanding the dynamics of what absolutely need to be present if we ever hope to have a successful relationship with anyone. But I want to teach you. Number one, each of us needs to be in a good place emotionally and psychologically and psychiatrically. We need to know who we are. We need to know what we want, what we don't want, what compromises we are willing to make when it comes to relationships, what trade-offs we are willing to make, and what trade-offs and compromises are absolutely, absolutely not going to be on the table. We have to be willing to work through our depression, our anxiety, some of our old relationship issues to understand what went wrong in some of our previous relationships. What, and again, this is not beating ourselves up. It's not a pronouncement of guilt. It's being honest and open and truthful about trying to figure this all out so that for people who do want relationships, and if you don't want a relationship, that's okay too. But for people who do, to really try and figure out the roadblocks, the problems that have gotten in the way in the past of being able to find and maintain a happy and successful relationship. So it really, really does begin with us. I know we hope, we grew up, I know I did, my mom would read me fairy tales, and the prince on the white horse would come and rescue, right, the damsel in distress. And this damsel who was in distress is all of a sudden she's being transformed. She's in a carriage, she's living in a palace, and there is a happily ever after ending. And it was only, my heavens, if it was really only that simple. But if we are looking and waiting for somebody to rescue us, we may be waiting for a very, very long time. We're the ones that have to do the rescuing, in quotes, of our own selves and work through our own issues. And, I used to tell my daughter when she was a little girl, of course, she, was listening to her mom on the radio and watching her mom on television. It was probably enough. It was probably over the top. But I used to say to her, look, that the relationship really, really does need to be the icing on the cake. And we need to be the cake. So I'm asking you, are there things for those of you who are listening right now and you want a relationship? And of course, these days, everybody is online. But the fact is that whether you meet somebody online or whether you meet them at work or whether meet them at a church or a synagogue, you still have to go through a process of discovery. And you still have to be okay. And you still have to know what you want. And you still have to work through your own issues so that you are in a good place and you have the kind of confidence and self-confidence about who you are. And in that way, you're able to make some really, really good choices. So the first thing, we need to be okay. The second thing, we have to have clarity about what ingredients actually go into a successful relationship. And if you were to ask your friends or if you were to ask yourself, I really wonder, what would you say? I mean, I think that a lot of people would say, communication, and of course, communication is absolutely, absolutely critical. But it's not the whole story. And I'm going to take you through the whole story during this show today so that you're going to have a very, very clear idea of all of the different things that you need to discover about the person who you think that you would like to really connect with and perhaps have a serious relationship with, okay? And this is where my 10-step formula came about. I was living in Providence, Rhode Island, and I had an Ask Beatty call-in counseling radio show on WPRO in Providence. It was the ABC affiliate, and that was really my first entree into the media. And it was in 1999. I'm aging myself a little bit. I decided that I wanted to do some research and I wanted to get a better understanding of relationships and why we were so amiss. And I did research with 450 people in the Boston, Providence, and Connecticut area. Single people, people who'd never been married, separated people, divorced people, widowed men and women. And as a result, uh, speaking with them and listening to everything that they had to say about relationships, I was able to come up with a 10-step formula, which culminated, the research and the formula culminated in my book, For Better, For Worse, Forever, Discover the Path to Lasting Love. And that is what the book is all about. You can get it on Amazon. I think you could still probably find it in some bookstores, where it takes you through, let's call it a process of discovery to find out who your partner is and who your partner is not. Because before I did the research, in my old spontaneous way, I mean, I think that people who know me would say I'm very spontaneous, but I'm also very cautious. And, one of the things that you've probably heard me say a lot is that we have to be very, very careful who we let into our lives. And that's not being paranoid, it's being smart. So before before I did the research, I would meet somebody, whether it was a woman, a man, a colleague, a potential colleague, and my inclination would be to say, I've met a really nice person, or I met a really honest person, or I met a really smart person. And what my work and my clinical experience, what the research, what the books have taught me is that I would never, ever, ever, ever make that kind of a statement today. And all we can say when we meet somebody initially is that the person appears to be, so all my friends, they know now, they know what I'm going to say. So they'll say, I met this terrific man, or I met this terrific woman. And they'll look at me and then they'll stop and they'll say, okay, I know what you're going to say. And they rephrase it. And they say that I've met somebody who appears to be, wonderful and smart and giving. And because that's all we can say. The interesting thing about the research is that what I found was that it takes about a year, not a week, not 2 weeks, not a month, to really go through this process of discovery, and that we cannot fast forward this process, right? And so what I want to do is to actually take you through the 10-step formula. Because again, when you think about it, we do research with every single thing in our life. I mean, even with this ridiculous TV, although we love the TV that Jim and I just bought, there was research. I took some time to try to look at the pros and the cons of television sets that I thought maybe that, I would want to buy. So we do. We spend all kinds of time researching cars and grams of fat and computers and cell phones than we do our partners, because we don't think about it. It's not sexy. It's not lovey-dovey. It's not romantic, but it is. Let me tell you, it's absolutely critical that we think about it this way. Because think to how often you've met somebody and you thought that you knew everything about this person, that you were in love, and that this person appeared to be exactly who he or she really seemed to be. And suddenly, without warning, your relationship is in shambles. Your mind is spinning. What went wrong? And chances are the signs were there all along, but that you just didn't know what went wrong. So I have good news, good evidence-based news that I really want to share with you. Now, remember, you're not going to put your partner or the person who you're going to be assessing, you're not going to put this person on a stand. I mean, this is not going to be a court of law. But what I found was that beginning at the beginning of their lives was really important. And you want to find out about what they experienced as a child growing up. I have a patient right now who grew up in a family where there was only trauma. There was sexual abuse, there was physical abuse, there was abuse of every single kind. And unfortunately, she spent the majority of her life until she really began to look into herself and she took the therapy that we did together very, very seriously. She was just kind of replaying her traumatic, abusive history. So what you want to do is find out, what did your partner, the person who you think you're in love with, the person who you think you want to have a relationship, what did this person experience growing up? Now you're not going to throw away somebody because they had a traumatic past, because they may have grown up in an abusive, a verbal abusive, a physically abusive, an emotionally abusive, a substance abusive. You're not going to do that. But what you want to find out is, what has this person done to move beyond the very, very unfortunate lessons that they learned growing up. And of course, it's not what you say, it's what you do. So you're going to have to, keep your eyes and ears wide open to see whether or not, in fact, the person has learned a new and better way of functioning than what he or she may have learned in their respective family of origin. So I want to hear something like, my family, it was crazy making. There was abuse of every kind, or I grew up in a single parent family and my mother had all these men coming to visit all the time, or there was alcoholism, or there was drug abuse, or there was sexual abuse. But this is what I did. I went to therapy. I knew that there needed to be a better way. I spoke to people. I tried to take care of myself. I tried to make sure that if I found myself going down a wrong path, that I had a support system, that I found a support system, that I built a support system so that I would not repeat the history of my early childhood. Now, if somebody said that to me, and I was starting to date them, I would be very, very impressed. Again, it's not what you say, it's what you do, so that as you would be playing out the relationship, you would in fact be able to see whether or not that person had indeed learned, a lot of the lessons. So again, it's not about throwing away people, but we want to know what have they done to overcome their obstacles and their challenges. Number two, this is the second chapter in the book, Lurking Around the Corner, Skeletons in the Closet. So, we're talking about things, and chapter 3 is also more skeletons lurking. We're looking at things like abuse of different kinds, whether or not we're talking about substance abuse or verbal abuse or emotional abuse, or sexual abuse. We want to be just very, very clear that we are not finding ourselves in a crazy making abusive situation of any kind. And I think when people are lonely, we tend to make a lot of excuses, for bad behavior. In fact, I had a woman that I was treating in Sarasota, Florida, And she came to see me, and she told me that she loved her husband. They had a wonderful life together, but that on occasion he would have too much to drink, and he became physically abusive. And I remember that first meeting that we had in my office. She says, "Well, it's not often. It's not often at all, but it's on occasion, almost, wanting to make excuses for his physically and emotionally abusive behavior." So, of course, when I do therapy, I begin at the beginning. I'm not a believer in bandage therapy, putting a bandage on a wound. So I go back to the origin, back to the family history. So, what did I learn? What did I learn about this woman and her family and her upbringing? Well, I learned that she had been hit almost every single day as a child. So it was a physically abusive family, emotionally, psychologically. So for her, it was interesting, and she says, "Well, it wasn't so often." For her, in her mind, the fact that he would hit her on occasion, it wasn't so bad. And I'm trying to remember who had referred her to me, because this was a family that was very well known in Sarasota. The husband was a big philanthropist, but in any case, she found her way to me, and she was able to see that, her distorted her distortions about what was really okay and not okay, and the confusion that she experienced was because of what happened to her as a child. And I will never forget the day when he came in with her, and she'd been in therapy with me for a couple of months, and she was finding her voice. She was finding the courage. And she said to him that, "If you ever touch me again, we're definitely going to get a divorce." And that was a game changer. But she needed to go back, and she needed to, first of all, look at herself. And fortunately, she was able to recognize that the fact that he hit her only on occasion was absolutely not okay. So moving along, communication. It is more than where are we going to go for dinner and what kind of food are we going to buy. It is about really being able to deal with all kinds of issues, the tough issues, the angry issues, the hurtful issues, the confusing issues, and to be able to do this well. And this is why I talk a lot about the importance of trying to teach people how to say it, where to say it, when to say it, and how to do all of this well. So let me ask you a question. Would you say, if you look at your relationships, your personal relationships, your business relationships, are there some things that you really need to get out with someone? And that doesn't mean screaming and yelling and throwing things, that you have yet to communicate, whether or not we're talking about past hurts, whether we're talking about things that are going on in the present, where for a variety of reasons that you have been reluctant to bring up the subject and say something like, "Hi, honey," or "Hello, my dear colleague. Uh, is this a good time?" And I think that's really important to set the scene so that you're not just, running in on somebody we're in the middle of doing something else, and starting a conversation. So is this a good time to have a conversation is a very important intro before you can actually have the conversation. But do you find in your life that you have what I call some unfinished business with people because you haven't been quite sure whether or not you wanted to say it, or whether you were afraid to say it, or you were frightened about what their reactions might be if you did say it? And yet, in relationships that are going to work, we need to find the words. We need to find the way. And mostly we need to give ourselves permission to be honest, so that if you're angry at your partner, if you're angry at a colleague or a family member or a boss, what are the consequences of not dealing? If you're not going to deal, if you're not going to find out, particularly in romantic relationships, with a colleague or with a boss, if it gets so bad, then nothing is going to change, then you can get another job. In a romantic relationship, in a love relationship, you're not looking, hopefully, to find a way out. You're hopefully looking to find ways to make amends and to make things work. And this is why, when people are getting to know each other, it's very easy to just kind of tiptoe, especially if you really liked the person and maybe it wasn't so bad, what he or she actually said, so that we don't communicate. And if we don't communicate, what we are doing is we are enabling a dynamic. Not only is it not good for the relationship, but we are enabling a dynamic that is not good for us. It's putting us in a really, when you think about it, a really sort of one down, and it's dishonest, because you're angry, you're upset, you're feeling hurt, and you're not being honest in communicating these feelings to your partner. Now, maybe your partner has no idea that he or she was rude or hurtful. But if we don't say anything, the probability of being able to have a healthy, happy, and honest and authentic relationship, the probability is not great. And the other thing is that we need to know when we're getting to know somebody about how able and capable they are about dealing with problems. I mean, unfortunately, in the early stages of dating, everybody is in love and we're happy and it's exciting, but there are always going to be problems in life that arise, in the very, very best of circumstances. And it is on us to find out whether or not the person who we think we may want to spend the rest of our life with, is this person capable? Does this person have the skill to be able to work out problems? When I'm upset, what does this person do? Does he or she just blow you off? Or is this person able and capable and skilled in the art of emotional communication and problem solving? Because I'm convinced that if people are not able to communicate and solve problems together, there is not going to be a good probability that the relationship is going to work out. Whether or not you stay with the person for 1,000 years, it is not going to be a happy and healthy relationship. So here we have communication and problem solving. Then we get to another area, which is emotional intimacy. And what is emotional intimacy? Well, sexual intimacy, that's another chapter. Okay. Emotional intimacy. Do you have the capability of caring and sharing and being loving and being supportive and being compassionate? I mean, I had a couple in my office yesterday, and his family had really, really hurt her in the early stages of their dating. And at this point, she wants absolutely nothing to do with them. And I get it. And instead of being able to, and he has a relationship with his family, they have 2 young children, and they want, the children to have, a kind, or he wants certainly the children to have a relationship with his parents. But what was so interesting, to observe is that as hurt as she was, and for all the right reasons, he was, his comments were, well, that's your truth. I'm sorry that you're hurt. rather than saying, honey, I really understand that what they did and what they said was really hurtful to you. And I'm so sorry that this has caused you such pain. That is what emotional intimacy sounds like. And that's where, when you're getting to know your partner, you want to know, do they have that kind of capability? And if they don't, you are going to have some big problems up the road, if not in the moment, to be with somebody who is incapable of compassion and empathy and respect and love and validation. You don't want to be with somebody who is going to gaslight you and just say, well, this is your truth. Of course, the sex, and the sex is important. And, hopefully you've got the chemistry, and there are always going to be ups and downs. I mean, literally ups and downs in people's sex lives. And again, it boils down to, do we care enough about the relationship, and are we willing to acknowledge, address, and resolve whatever the issues are that come up, whether we're talking about in or out of the bedroom. Uh, Chapter 8, old baggage and past loves. And, if you're dealing with divorced families, there's always going to be, complications with, the exes and visitation and custody. And all of this really does boil down to love, great communication skills, and great problem solving skills. But don't pretend that these are not factors, and don't pretend that these are not issues that actually have to be discussed in depth. Chapter 9, we're almost done. Deal makers, deal breakers. And again, it's about being honest about your values and goals and your lifestyle. And if you happen to be religious, factoring in that into conversations. And of course, politically, I mean, you don't have to have and share the same identical political values, but you do want to be, at least able to discuss, so that the differences are not going to destroy and polarize you as a couple. So there are a lot of things, about children and parenting and goals and values. And as you can see, that this can't be done during the course of a week or month. You need to play out the points, of course, using my tennis analogy, as you do in a match. And you need to see, you need to be aware. And when differences and issues and upsets arise, the smart couples, the successful couples, the happy couples, they don't ignore or deny or avoid. They sit down and they talk about this. They talk about their differences. They talk about their concerns. And ideally, I mean, you're not going to be finding a carbon copy of yourself. That would probably be maybe boring. You're looking to find out, with all the differences, with the discrepancies of what we may want, what we don't want, is there enough? Is there enough in our relationship so that we can work through things and ultimately find win-win resolutions to our differences in values, to our differences in politics, to our differences in goals, to our differences in terms of where we might want to live and the kind of lifestyle that we might have. But these are all the things, and I can understand why people want to avoid doing this, because this is really hard work. And then finally, number 10, being realistic. There's no such thing as the perfect partner. We have to be honest. We're not perfect. Perfection simply doesn't exist. And if you and your partner, if you find that you're skilled in the most important ingredients, you want to take a look at the compromises that you may want to make. And certain compromises and trade-offs are okay. So you may not agree on the paint color, in your house. And that it may be a silly example, but certain situations should never, ever, ever, ever be tolerated under any circumstances at all. And of course, those include, poor communication and poor problem solving and abuse of any kind, whether we're talking about substance abuse, whether we're talking about physical abuse, whether we're talking about, well, isn't that interesting, right? In the middle of talking about abuse, I thought my telephone was off. But again, compromises when it comes to communication and problem solving and emotional abuse, verbal abuse, substance abuse, sexual abuse or harassment. These are things that should never, ever, ever, ever be compromisable under any circumstances at all. And, when you go through this and, it's just really important to do if you are thinking about a relationship in terms of something that is potentially going to be serious. I mean, this is the roadmap. This is really, really the roadmap that we all have to take. Because again, let's just look at the statistics that I cited at the beginning of the show. We're not doing well, and we're not doing well because we're not in a good place. We don't know the ingredients, and we're not doing a very, very good job at all. In fact, we're doing a very poor job when it comes to assessment. I promised you that I was going to actually keep you up to date about the response from various different schools and organizations that I have reached out to, because these are things that should be part and parcel of curriculums in schools and universities. These should be programs that I think churches and synagogues and mosques should be incorporating into their programming. But I have to say that there has been recently very, very, very little interest at all. So if our educators are not interested, and people generally, are not interested to do this hard work, which it is, uh, how do we move forward? How do we change the trajectory, the sad trajectory of what is going on? But look, we can't change anybody, but each of us definitely can take whatever steps that we need to take to make changes within ourselves so that we can empower ourselves and that we can actually keep ourselves safe. Safe. So it's 3:58 here in very, very rainy New York City today. And I want to leave you with my 2 weekly messages. Of course, the first is that we need to do everything possible to be living our lives in ways that are in our best interest, whether or not we choose to have a relationship or we choose not to have a relationship. We need to be good to ourselves. And secondly, we all need to do a much, 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 much better job to learn to accept others and accept others' differences. And the world would be a much happier and safer place if we gave up this win-lose idea. And if we found ways, and if we were interested in finding ways to come up with win-win resolutions, not only in our personal lives, but in our political lives as well. So I hope you have a really good rest of the day. I hope that today's show was motivational and inspiring and that you can take away something that will be helpful to yourself. So goodbye, everybody. Talk with you next Monday and every Monday from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And be well, take care of yourself, and let's take care of others as well. Bye-bye, everybody.